So, John, after 3 weeks of episodes, we got to the end of our parables series. Do you ever want to look at a parable again?
I do.
Me too.
Absolutely. I've had a fresh energy for the parables and really thoroughly enjoyed our conversations. I mean, I hope our listeners did, and I know we've had some really lovely and encouraging feedback, which is fabulous. But just taking your time, slowing that stuff down, not reducing those magnificent parables of Jesus to sort of soundbite theology, and actually letting them breathe a little bit, letting them speak. Oh, that's just been so fantastic. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And what's been lovely for me, David, in a general reflection, is that it's just helped me again in our conversation to look with fresh eyes on lots of stuff I was familiar with. And as my granny would have said, familiarity, it can breed contempt. You can become a little bit overly familiar, and then your brain says, oh, I know what this parable's about. I know what this, oh yeah, I've read this before. I've read the Gospels a gazillion times as a follower of Jesus. And I think the exercise has been lovely. And I hope our listeners have grabbed this, that it's just been a beautiful, slow this thing down, frame by frame, as well as seeing where it sits in the broader picture of the story. So it's been brilliant, Dave. I've learned so much.
For me, it's been interesting how so many times in my life, I will say to people, okay, so the text is like an onion. You've got to peel it layer by layer. And I think it's important to note even that all that I am is maybe a few layers further ahead than somebody that might be listening. Because I've had moments where I've sat down and thought, oh my goodness, I've never connected those two things together, or I've not seen that in the text before. I could take you to several points throughout the series where in my study and prep for the podcast episode, I realized, oh, look at that word. How have I never, and there's that moment where, you know, those sort of like hidden pictures and things like that you get sometimes. But once you've seen the thing, you can't unsee the thing. Yeah. And then you find yourself thinking, how did I never see that before? And I've found that with the parables, which I hope comes across, that there is this quest to keep digging into scripture that there isn't really a bottom to it. You can keep going down. The way that you've shown us so often, connecting this parable to this text in the Bible, or this story in the Bible, or this other part of the text. Moments where, bits and pieces of parables that we've taken are very famous, but then we've pointed out that actually the context, the surrounding stories, weren't known to everybody. I found all of that just really exciting again, John. And I know I joked at the start just then saying, do you not want to look at parables again? My actual genuine feeling is I'm a little sad that we've finished the series on parables.
For sure. Totally agree. And I think one of the things I really hope our listeners have enjoyed and being able to reflect on themselves is the sort of connectedness and the contextualization of some of those beautiful stories. We've said it over and over again. When you vacuumize them, when you pull the parable out of the native soil in which it was planted, so to speak, it can become something other than I think Jesus intended it to be. And of course, we have to be very careful that we're not setting ourselves up as the experts of the interpreters of Jesus. But we have all made mistakes. If every preacher, communicator, follower of Jesus is being honest, who's listening to us, we've all made mistakes where we have read into the text instead of reading out of it, or we have missed something really obvious because we vacuumized it and disconnected it from either the immediate flow of the passage, which, I mean, how many times, David, has that happened to us, where the immediate flow has been like light bulb moments and power and weight. But also, of course, as we've leaned into Jesus' brilliance at connecting the themes of the Tanakh, the themes of the Old Testament, into his everyday ministry. And those themes run time and time again. He drops these breadcrumbs. And if you're searching, if you're looking, if your ears are open to hear, or as we reflected once, your eyes are open to hear. if you've got your sort of antenna on, you're spotting the breadcrumb. You go, wow, hold on, I didn't see that before, and then suddenly you're into another layer of these magnificent ideas. So I hope that's been a blessing to the listeners.
And even like the little things, like I was laughing as I was working through some of the edits, I was laughing at how there's these moments of the Good Samaritan, right? And then we notice he's never called good in the whole parable. I was halfway through the episode about the persistent widow and the unjust judge, and I've taught that and worked on that, and then you pointed out, he's never actually called unjust. We just make that assumption based on the things that he said, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm halfway through a podcast and I've noticed this for the first time.
Sure. Fantastic.
I mean, for me, one of the things that has excited me in the series, and I really hope people grasp that, is the multi-layered nature of the parables. That like we started by saying, be careful not just to simply relegate these to kids' stories. But I think there's another section of don't stop teaching these to your children either. So we're not trying to elevate them away from that. Their simplicity at level one is their attraction. Mm-hmm. But it's funny how you start reading these parables and it's like, these are children's stories. By the end of a 3-week series on the parables, I wonder how many of our people would sit back and say, I kind of understand why Jesus got himself killed now, because some of these parables are deeply controversial.
Profoundly controversial. And again, I think, doesn't it show us, if any of our listeners are preachers, communicators, teachers, how often, I suppose, in modern church, we fall into the trap of almost using the parable as a sermon illustration in saying something else, when actually it's a 3-course lunch all by itself. It's not just an add-on. It's not, let's throw this in as a little bit of a sort of an appetizer. No, this thing sits in its own right. It speaks to us and it informs us. And of course, once we permit ourselves to get into the cultural context of the world of Jesus, the complexity of the religious world, the polarization of the social world of Jesus, oh my goodness, then these parables are, one of the analogies I think we've used more than once, are hand grenades that he just drops. Yes. And then you go, right, shrapnel about to happen. This is going to spread, and who knows what it's going to do. So there is this, I think, Jesus' ability to communicate with his audience, to push hard on some things, to go soft on other things, to throw stuff out that seems to be fairly self-explanatory, and then other stuff that actually needs a follow-up conversation. His genius at being able to move around that and navigate that in the genre of the parables is stunning, because it doesn't feel to me like there's one template for the parables. It's like it's covering a range of amazing communication from Jesus about the kingdom of God.
And I'm really wanting to push a little on that thought of them just not being illustrations, because what struck me, and I suppose this probably isn't a surprise to most people, but it's not like you and I come from a lifetime of focused, intense work simply on the parables. We've been working on my sort of subject specialties were more in the Pauline letters. So in my life, I've taught series on the parables in churches, but the intensity of producing a 3-week podcast series was very different, and also you were not governed by some of the same preaching requirements. So it's let's just keep digging and see what we get. Something that struck me, and I wonder if you would resonate with this, is there has been a tendency in my experience, exactly as you say, to say, okay, here's the parable. This is a nice warm-up that gets us into thinking about something. And then we'll jump to some of the speech sections of Jesus or into Paul's letters to now do the proper theology and understand. And I think that sometimes in that change that we make, so when we talk about, let's take grace as an example that appears regularly in the parables. When we use the parable as the sort of starter intro, and then we try and theologize ourselves out of that, what we end up with, the grace that we end up with, always seems a little anemic.
Yes.
Whereas what it strikes me is that here would be the thing. I think here's my big statement, and tell me whether you agree with me or not. And you're welcome not to. I think you could actually reconstruct the entire gospel just from the parables that we've got. I think all of the messages of grace and I realize that could sound reductionist, and I don't mean it that. But if all you had was a book with just the parables in it, I think you've got enough data there, if you're really willing to struggle with it, to find all of the glory of the gospel, of its grace, of its freedom, of its restoration, its reconciliation. And I've not often encountered people really pushing that message. It's more what you were saying, this kind of illustration until we get onto the real thing. But actually, I think if you did stick with the parables, and again, really cautiously saying that because I don't want people to say don't read anything else. That's not what I'm saying. Sure. But the radical grace of Jesus is absolutely there in its full splendor if you'll stop long enough to look at it. I mean, would you agree with that, John?
Completely. I think my upbringing, without being disingenuous to an upbringing in church that I am so grateful for. So let me caveat everything I'm about to say with that. But my upbringing, we tended to relegate the teaching of Jesus in the Gospels to the sort of conversation to the non-Christian. So the words of Jesus were often used for sermons to a non-Christian context. And then when you were doing Bible studies, that's where you did the other bits of the Bible. And actually, I've been appealing for many years now, having done a lot of work in the Gospel of Luke, and saying we, as Christians, we must be much more intentional about our study, reflection of, and communication of the Gospels in general, and the incredible teaching of Jesus within those Gospels. And absolutely, I mean, you and I have talked about reading backwards from Jesus into Tanakh and reading forward into Paul and John and James and Peter from Jesus, because without Jesus, Paul doesn't really make sense. And without Jesus, Moses doesn't make sense as far as a Christian worldview is concerned. And so it is absolutely vital we understand Jesus. And when you think about the sheer volume of what he unpacks through a parable medium, we've got to take those parables absolutely seriously, or we are in danger of missing vital, not just connectors, but I think vital foundational ideas in the story of grace, in the story of, David, the parable of the master of the vineyard who hires the workers. I mean, seriously, that alone stands as a magnificent story of grace and generosity, and it offends every sense of our self-righteousness and our self-achievement and our hyphenated self-world and spirituality. So if you just sat in that for a while, there would be so many layers of an understanding of grace. And that's just one parable from the mouth of Jesus that we could then nuance out. So yeah, absolutely.
And so part of me hopes for the series, it's there, it's live, it's online now. I hope people go back to it. I hope that people listen to some of those parable podcasts again, not because I want people listening to us again, but just to remind them that there's stuff in there that needs digging around with. I've heard of some people saying to me, oh, maybe we could use these in our small group, in our house group at home. I say, absolutely. They're a great resource if you want to preach a series on the parables. You can sort of steal them and use them, and you don't even need to credit us if you don't want to. Just have those ideas.
It was funny, David. I was speaking to someone on Sunday at a church that I was ministering at, and she said, I am loving your Two Text podcast. And this is just ordinary member of the church. She's not employed by the church, or she's not a preacher, teacher. Just loves Jesus, serves her local church. And she said, what's the next series? So after parables. And so I was giving her a little bit of a preview, and she said, so do I have to pay for that then? And I said, no, this is free. It's always going to be free. We want you just enjoy this. And she thought we were sort of pulling her into to a free series in order to grab her eventually. And I said, oh, no, this whole thing's for free. We've been blessed. We've been made rich by a fantastic opportunity that we have. We want to give all this stuff away, and we don't mind if you give it away either. So she was thrilled. She was pumped because the next series is free.
And so two things from two texts. I do think, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has got involved, listened, and shared this. Like the numbers, John, when I look at our podcasting hosting company telling us that we were in the top 10% of their released podcasts in our release month, and we only released at the end of the month. It looks like we'd be very close to top 5. We were appearing in a few religion and spirituality charts in that opening week, which was just amazing. And I mean, for me, I always thought it'd be nice if people listened. I didn't expect thousands of people listening in so quickly. And so I think from both of us, it's just a big thanks to everybody who has shared this widely via all sorts of processes of social media and text and email and everything like that.
So blessed.
And then the second thing is then just a little, what are we going to do next? The lady asked you, is the next series going to be for cost? Well, no, the next series is going to be free. We're going to be dropping to our original plan, which is a couple of texts that we'll look at every 2 weeks. So there'll be episodes appearing every 2 weeks to allow you and I to keep working at our day jobs. But let's chat a little bit about that. So our next series is going to be about miracles.
So excited about that. Yeah, absolutely. Parables to miracles. And of course, I think one of the things I'm loving about the second series is it remains profoundly Jesus-centric. Yes. And I think one of the things I've been certainly picking up from feedback that has come to me via 2 text listeners is we're loving the Jesus centricity. We're loving the fact that we're not getting bogged down with other issues. We may have to take those on, but there's a beauty and purity about let's just think Jesus. Let's just think about Jesus, and let's allow Jesus to think into our world. And I think people are loving that, responding to that. So this series is then another step into that beautiful Jesus centricity, looking at some of his gorgeous miracles, but also not just, here's Jesus and he heals someone, but thinking, reflecting about why that happens, the context in which that happens, what happens after that happens. Is that somehow connected to his message, and how does he use all of that? I love that. And I'm really excited about the outline we've designed together and some of the stories we are going to talk about, David. I can't wait. So excited about it.
I'm exactly the same. And I dare say there'll be a few comments relating to parables throughout that season as well. But like you, I'm excited. Jesus told a lot of parables, so we've kind of looked at some of them. He also did a lot of pretty incredible things as well. My experience as a sort of younger person and growing up into biblical academia, the big question about the miracles of Jesus was basically always, did they happen or did they not happen? True. And if they did happen, wow, that's amazing. And if they didn't happen, then big questions about our faith, right? Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do in this series, of course, is not simply get bogged down in that question of did they happen or didn't they happen. That's always going to be a question of faith for people. You and I are both of the persuasion that these stories are true. This is what happened. As incredible as that is, that's the point. It's just like when Jesus fed 5,000 people, nobody was standing there going, oh, another one of these. It was revolutionary, shocking, unexpected, right? But what the gospel writers are often doing is they're showing us these stories, not simply to say, wow, look, Jesus did amazing things, but there's an underlying, like there was for the parables, there's layers of depth here, of lessons, of practical applications for us today about what it means for Jesus to do this sort of thing. Yeah. And I'm really excited about digging into some of that and having hopefully our listeners go, wow, that miracle story now has immense application for me to think about in my journey of faith and spirituality today.
For sure. And we don't want in any way to minimize the incredible supernatural dynamic of these wonderful miracles. And as you said, and we're very happy to be upfront about that, we accept these incredible stories at a supernatural faith level, but just to see them as actions of miraculous intervention on their own is to miss. To go back to the onion that we started with, is to miss layer upon layer of message and nuance and impact. And I think Jesus communicating something in and through and beyond the incredible moment that we would call a miracle. And I'm excited about holding in tension both those ideas, celebrating the supernatural, but digging into something of the deep meaning of some of those fantastic moments in the life of Jesus.
Absolutely, John. So to our dear listeners, if you have not had enough of us being really excited about parables, then next up from June 22nd is John and I being really excited about miracle stories in the Gospels, and no doubt taking you far afield from the Gospels into Paul in the Old Testament and other things at the same time. So we'd love to invite you to just join us again on June 22nd as we begin our second season of 2 texts on the miracles of Jesus and what they might mean for us.